Hey everybody, it's Kathy Boyle, president of Chapin Hill Advisors. Today we're interviewing another resource in our divorce circle. So we love advocating for our clients and making sure that they have the right resources that they need in the ending of their marriage. So choosing the right attorney is one of the most critical things that you can do if you're approaching your divorce. So today we're interviewing Kenneth Novenstern. He is a partner with Fredman, Bacon, and Novenstern. They have offices in Mount Kisco and White Plains. So Kenneth, let's talk big picture. How big is the firm? What practice areas do you cover? Mediation, collaborative, litigation, what's your primary focus?
First, thanks Kathy for this opportunity. We have 5 attorneys, 3 partners and 2 associates, and we practice primarily, almost exclusively in the area of matrimonial law, family law, divorce, separation agreements, prenuptial agreements. And so the 5 attorneys are Neil Fredman. Neil has been practicing for about 10 years longer than me, probably about 45 years, probably exclusively matrimonial law with a little bit of something else over the years. Neil's father was Sam Fredman, who was a prominent matrimonial attorney in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and became a judge. My partner, Ellen Jenko Bacon, again, almost exclusively matrimonial law. And all of us primarily do litigation, also collaborative law, some mediation. Myself, I've been practicing since I started in Syracuse in 1984. And moved back to Westchester in about 1986, and have been in Northern Westchester since 1986, and then primarily in White Plains for the last year or so. Our senior counsel, Christopher Owen. Chris has been practicing about as long as me, maybe a little bit longer, and he does primarily our trial work, hearing work, depositions, and our junior associate, Elizabeth Nakamura, and Liz does a variety of things, our research, discovery. She's great with computers and technology. So that's the firm. So.
Okay, and then let's talk about, before we got on the call, we talked a little bit about some of the stakes. We tend to represent wives that are married to wealthy business owners, hedge fund, private equity. We can, of course, do both sexes, but I find that I'm a great resource because of my financial background. So one of the mistakes that I often see women make is that they get the name of a big litigator that their friend used for their wicked divorce, and their divorce isn't going to be wicked. So how do you choose the right attorney? And what do you think the practical method of talking to the attorney and finding out whether he or she is right for you?
You know, first, you obviously have to sit down with the attorney, whether it's Zoom call or in person, and have a conversation. You should have questions. You should have an idea of what's most important to you, what your interests are, what your concerns are, what your goals are, if you can enunciate that early in the process. You know, in terms of choosing an attorney, you have to decide, are you going full bore in terms of litigation? Are you willing to litigate, but do you want to use that as a way of moving your case forward and trying to make progress with an overall resolution? You should understand that whichever process you use, the likelihood of ending up in some kind of comprehensive stipulation of settlement is probably 90–95%. Very few cases end up going to trial. Judges push settlement. And from a financial resource perspective, settlement's important. So, just be careful not to make the mistake of waiting, and having opportunities pass by because someone loses a job, because something else happens, and I've seen that happen too often. Collaborative law and mediation are good options, but again, you need to be willing to press and move forward. And when there are long gaps in matters, that's when problems often arise.
All right, so let's go back to that first interview. I think you brought up a great point. I think very often people that are getting divorced, both spouses get caught up in the emotionality of it. And if you've been a stay-at-home mom, you've been taking care of the kids, you still have young kids or kids at home, I think prioritizing whether you want to stay in the marital home, whether you want the children to stay in the same school system, whether you want part of their pension as opposed to more alimony now. So is that the kind of picture that would help you determine whether or not you can help them appropriately?
Sure. I mean, we often find that when people are coming in for the first consultation, they haven't reached the point where they're making those kinds of choices and decisions. It is a process. I mean, having gone through my own divorce about 8 years ago, I know that it's one of the most traumatic things that you can go through as an adult, you know, beside the death of family member. Divorce is right up there. But certainly, I think implicit in your question is the need to try and get a support system in place so that you're dealing with the emotional aspect of your life, and you have friends, family that you're working with, a therapist if that's appropriate, and use your attorney for legal advice as much as possible. Certainly, there's some degree of discussion on life and what happened and trying to move forward, and you know that's totally understandable, but best to try and stay focused. Also important to have an understanding with regard to financial information. So many times we have people come in where the other spouse, often the husband, was responsible for handling all the financial matters. So I had a case recently where the client came in and said that she had absolutely no financial documents, that she knew very little about the financial situation except for the fact that she was in the marital residence in northern Westchester and that they had a vacation home. And the more information, the more documents, retirement account statements, bank account statements, brokerage statements, tax returns that you collect, the better off you'll be in the long run, because you're less reliant on the other person to act in good faith, or for you to have to start subpoenaing everything just to get a basic understanding of the financial situation.
Right. And I've actually advised people who were thinking of getting divorced. I had a good friend of mine who was had signed a prenup, and she was very upset that the children from the first marriage were coming before her. So she's acting emotionally. And I had a little breakfast meeting with her and suggested that she make copies of every single statement, because very often, once you're separated, you absolutely will not see documents that are not coming to the home. If things are in single name, you don't
Right.
see those documents. If things are in pension accounts, the corporation is not allowed to give the spouse information. And I think that that becomes an issue that women very often should be more prepared in really knowing their financial position. So let's talk about litigation can go on and on and on. And yes, most of them settle. I had one particular case where the husband was so angry that the wife was leaving him, basically, that he was going to trial unless she absolutely took her forensic and her CPA out of the settlement. So she got a very large settlement, but her forensic attorney and her CPA were almost $1 million. So I think that that's another thing that you can get weary of the process. So what's a typical litigation process, if there is one? Ranges from how many months to how many years?
So in Westchester County, there's definitely an effort to move cases. As of over the course of the last 10 years, starting in 2010, when Justice Schenkman became the administrative judge, to the present, there's been a push to, once cases get onto the court calendar through the filing of an RJI, there's a push to get that case resolved in 6 months to a year. And COVID has created a bit of a pause in that regard, but there's still that push. And, you know, it's realistic to get a case done in a year. Can it take a year and a half? Yes. Are there horror stories? Yes, where cases take much longer. But right now, Judge Lubell is the administrative judge of the matrimonial part in Westchester. He's generally accessible to conference cases. I just had a phone call this morning, a court conference with Judge Koba, the other judge in the matrimonial part. And these judges want to move cases. They know that people often have limited resources and that what they walk out of the divorce with is what they will have for the rest of their lives, obviously subject to becoming reemployed or building up your assets again after divorce. But it's very important to be prepared to move, be prepared to keep things moving, and with the goal of getting everything done. What I usually say when a client asks me, how long will this take, is that most cases that came in a year ago today are done. And so, your case can be different, but in some part, it's going to depend on the parties and how much they cooperate and push.
Got it. So let's talk about collaborative law. Can you just explain what it is and who is a best potential fit for collaborative?
I'll start with the second question. The best fit for collaborative are people who have some understanding of their financial situation, are prepared to meet regularly, provide the financial information that we as attorneys need or that a financial neutral will need. And Kathy, I know that you're connected with people who can act as financial advisors. In collaborative law, we use people who are neutrals, generally within the New York Association of Collaborative Professionals. Collaborative law is a divorce process, and it's mediation based. Both parties have attorneys, and the attorneys are trained. I started with the NYACP back in 2004. I'm the vice president. I'll be president in 2021 and 22. I'm the co-chair with Melissa Goodstein of the Training and Education Committee, and we put on trainings constantly for all of us. And it's an excellent group of attorneys, mental health professionals. I know that Kathy, you're familiar with Tony Marcus, also in Mount Kisco, Amy Karen Day, who used to be up here and just moved back into the city. And so there's some really excellent attorneys. And part of the point of collaborative law is that, we work with people often. We have a good sense of who we can trust. You get a better feeling of trust to the extent that you know people better, interact with them socially, professionally. And so collaborative law, in a sentence or two, is a mediation-based approach. Everyone is acting in good faith. Everyone is cooperating, providing the required financial information. There are a series of 4-way or 5-way or 6-way meetings, depending on whether they're financial neutrals, mental health professionals to assist the parties with parenting issues, emotional issues in the case, so that someone's not paying an attorney $495 an hour on the emotional issues, unless they, it happens. Again, I'm not being critical in that regard. And so you go through a series of 4-way meetings. Hopefully you maintain momentum, and over the course of a few months or several months, go through issue by issue, discuss people's interests and concerns, and you're essentially building up this pile of agreements, which will eventually go into a separation agreement. And the goal, as I said earlier, the goal in most processes is to work out a settlement. How you get there is another story, but collaborative law is an excellent process. I would say it's a kinder, gentler way of getting divorced, but again, dependent on people cooperating